If a face watched you from the forest at midnight, unblinking gold lantern eyes, a mask that doesn't move, would you call it wisdom or doom? The owl appears where borders thin, between daylight and dark, between the living and the dead, between what we think we know and what starts to breathe in the unanswered questions. It is the emblem that refuses to choose, and so we made it choose for us. We gave it the burden of prophecy, the glamour of intelligence, the stain of grief. Tonight we follow those eyes into the oldest rooms of our imagination and ask what the owl has been telling us all along. Start where coins speak. In ancient Athens, the currency that traveled across seas bore an owl with eyes round as moons and feathers scored like a patient script. On one side of the silver tetradrachm, the goddess Athena, her helmet crested, cool as stone. On the other, her omen bird, called Glox in Greek, the little owl. It was more than civic branding. It was a cosmology minted into metal. Athena's city declared publicly that wisdom had a face, and it was nocturnal. Traders in Cyprus, in Egypt, in Sicily held that face between finger and thumb and made deals under its gaze. An Athenian soldier could go to battle with an owl in his pocket and feel the goddess close. When ancient writers describe a bird of Athena crossing a battlefield at a crucial hour, some say Marathon, some say Salamis. They are recording less a zoological fact than a ritual of meaning. The night's watcher endorsing daylight's desperate gambit. Yet even here, the line blurs. The owl sees what the fighter cannot. Its pupils are windows punched into a gold coin of the world. Owls do not roll their eyes side to side. They rotate their entire skull as if their heads are instruments. They hunt by listening, not with human-like discrimination, but with a radar of feathered silence. Their wings are engineered to swallow their own noise, serrated edges combing turbulence into hush. Once you've learned that silence, a duel is a ridiculous thunderstorm, a market, a clattering hallucination. Small wonder that a culture obsessed with rational order and civic discourse misrecognized this hush as intelligence, a flattering reflection of its own ideals. Athena's neat wisdom, we say. But the owl's wisdom is not neat. It starts where our categories taper into questions and then just keeps going. Not every civilization invited the night to their councils. Romans called the owl noctua and listened with dread. Augurs could convert a bird's cry into policy. If an owl nested in the temple eaves, it was a bad arithmetic. The sum of omen equaled misfortune. Latin poets stacked owls among witches and dispellers, slotted them into a grammar of unease. In the city that loved an omen almost as much as it loved a road, the owl carried receipts for things you could not repair. The same bird that crowned Greek coins became a dark invoice in Roman nights. The discrepancy is not a contradiction. It's a map of how we bind the same animal to different anxieties. Further east, an older shadow spreads its wings. In Mesopotamia, a carved relief now called the Berni or Queen of the Night shows a nude winged figure flanked by owls and perched on lions. Scholars argue fiercely about her identity, Ishtar, Ereshkigal, or a demoness, while elsewhere the name Lilith glides in like a rumor. In later texts, Lilith becomes the night-flying figure who steals infants or seduces sleepers, a narrative born from a web of fears, of women who refuse, of deaths in childbirth, of night's capacity to undo the day's tidy order. To place owls at her feet is to make a kind of logic out of uncanniness. The bird whose face is a mask becomes the companion of all masks. Here, the owl is not a recruiter of wisdom, but a courier from the borderlands. Cross oceans and the night is still staffed. In Mesoamerican codices, owls serve the lords of the underworld as messengers who can walk the air between bones and sunlight. Aztec artists sculpted owls with flared crests and dagger beaks, hard angles as if each feather were an instrument of adjudication. The owl could deliver news from Mictlan, and news from the underworld is rarely good. For many indigenous traditions, varied, living, and too layered to flatten here, the owl appears as lawkeeper, threshold guardian, or grim reminder that some roads through the dark are not safe for the living. Approach with respect, leave with fingers unburned. This is not a symbol you borrow to look interesting. It is a contract. Then India, where symbols also argue with themselves. The goddess Lakshmi sometimes rides an owl named Uluka, a vehicle whose eyes cut into illusion's lamplight. For some communities, the owl is a reminder to avoid the stupidity of greed because it hunts at night and cannot see the thick noon. For others, Lakshmi's bird is simply a wise attendant, patient to the goddess's flowing abundance. The point is that the owl keeps its ambivalence intact. In any given street, it can warn or bless. In any given hymn, it can offer a different door out of the same room. And through the Middle Ages, when bestiaries tried to rewire creation into moral drama, the owl became the sinner who loves darkness, hiding from the daylight of truth. Artists painted the bird with a ring of jeering songbirds, harassing it at dawn. A parable that scolded the stubborn. It's not a pleasant role, but it was a role that fit the manuscript margins. The proud person is the bird that refuses the light. Of course, not every monk wrote the same sermon into feathers. In some margins, the owl bears the light into darkness as the figure of Christ among pagans, an inversion typical of the medieval appetite for allegory. Even here, the bird won't settle. The tide of meaning rocks it from salvage to condemnation and back. Philosophy, late to everything by its own admission, decided the owl was its mascot. Hegel wrote a line that will outlast most of the arguments it concludes. The Owl of Minerva spreads its wings only with the falling of the dusk. We understand life at the end of the day, when it has already happened. We write the rules after the game ends. The owl is the faculty that flies only when the sun refuses, the book that opens when the fire dwindles. It is not prophetic, it is diagnostic. It is the autopsy table wisdom that knows the body's secrets by their aftermath. Some love this, some resent it. Either way, an owl lives in the sentence now and will not be evicted. You can hear psychology stepping closer, tapping the floorboards at 2 in the morning. Jungians like to say the owl is a psychopomp of the shadow, a guide among the unacceptable brightnesses that we exile. The shadow is not evil, it is exiled. The feelings we dismiss, the griefs we defer, the desires we bury, all become nocturnal because we did not give them daylight. An owl arrives in a dream and stares like a doctor who wants you to stop speaking in metaphors. Wake up, it suggests, then lets you keep sleeping. The owl is the brain's way of telling the story it cannot tell itself out loud. You wake, shook, and say, I was followed. But by what? And why did it keep its distance? Some of this owes to the animal itself. If you've ever stood under a tree's black ribs and felt the air shift before a silent shape passes, if your neck hair rose and you didn't know why until 2 seconds later, you understand why we built cathedrals of symbol on this flight. The way the eyes front the skull like ours, the eerie stillness of the face within a moving head, the way the beak is tucked into a solemn mask, the roundness that looks like softness and is, in fact, efficiency. We recognize ourselves in the owl, and what we recognize isn't comfortable. There's a poise there that isn't social, a gaze that does not ask permission to be understood. Before we go further into the dark, let's make a pact. If the night roads of myth and history and psychology are the kind you like to walk, if you want more forbidden texts and symbol lore, more animals that carry constellations in their silhouettes, subscribe and stay with us. It's easy to wander back to daylight and forget the dream. We build these maps for those who want to remember them. Modernity thinks it's too clever for omens, but the owl still shows up like a watermark. Libraries crown their shelves with little brass owls, a joke that thinks it isn't serious. Universities tuck owls into their crests, as if to say that end-of-day wisdom is a campus amenity. Corporate logos borrow the animal's mask to promise alert service. Those concentric eyes on your phone's travel app, the mascot that hoots reminders, the sleek fashion label that lines up gold pupils on black leather. What are these if not small secular prayers to be seen in the dark? To have information, ticket times, notification nudges, exclusivity, whispered in our ears without anyone else knowing. In fiction, the bird never retired. Wizards send letters with owls. Detectives in surreal towns whisper that the owls are not what they seem. A synthetic owl blinks at a future detective who cannot tell memory from manufacture. If a storyteller wants to open a door to the uncanny without flooding the room, an owl will do. It can perch calmly on the threshold while the air changes around it. And for every romanticized messenger bird, there is the other owl, the one perched above the gallows or on a battlefield, the screech whose sound in daylight sends a chill. Shakespeare knew this well. The owl calls in his tragedies when the human plot has turned a corner into something beyond repair. There is always the risk of misuse, of course. Conspiracy culture loves the owl. Paint a giant bird behind a bonfire, and you have instant menace. Add whispers about cults and secrets, and you have a story that sells. But if we are honest, the image works because it's already anciently charged. A ritual statue only borrows energy from a reservoir that has been filling since Athens, since Rome, since the underworld needed a courier. And anyone who tells the story should also tell the context, performance, theater, symbolism used for club identity, and how easy it is to mistake aesthetic for doctrine. Symbols are tools that can cut and heal, depending on the hands that hold them. The contradictions keep multiplying. In some indigenous North American teachings, the owl's appearance warns of imbalance or death. In others, it calls the community back to order, the night watchman enforcing laws that daylight neglects. In some South American ceramics, moche artists gave owls weapons and made them companions of warriors, deadly, efficient, eyes like chipped obsidian. In others, the owl is a shaman with feathered ears, mid-flight between worlds. The pattern is not chaos. It is a map of how we experience night, as a space of both danger and revelation. To strip the owl of either is to lie about the dark. Even in zoology's fluorescent rooms, the owl refuses to be ordinary. Its ears are offset. One ear is higher than the other, a crookedness that becomes a compass. Sound arrives at different times and intensities, and the owl triangulates that difference with a precision we might call mystical if math hadn't already recruited the word. This asymmetry is the physical signature of a symbolic role. The owl listens to a world slanted, then corrects for it. It hunts through noise, which is another way of saying it finds truth where there is distraction. To hold an owl skull is to hold geometry that has learned how to kill and on which we have draped our abstractions like velvet. Historians and anthropologists, cautious by training, propose that the nocturnal predator, often seen rarely and heard strangely, became a convenient vessel for fears of illness and loss. A cry in the night before a fevered death becomes a causal story, because our brains despise misfortune without narrative. One bad event and one eerie sound become a chain. The owl did not kill anyone, but it was present. Presence sneaks into blame. At the same time, where a civilization valued strategy, literacy, and craft, the owl's focused stillness stood ready to be sanctified. Athena was not a goddess of trance. She was a god of plans. The owl looks like planning. It waits, it measures, it drops. Anyone who has watched a raptor judge distance can envy the clarity. Mystics read the bird differently. For them, the owl is a veil lifter. The shape that raises every hair on your body is not your enemy. It is your teacher wearing unorthodox clothing. To encounter an owl is to be reminded that you live inside a skin-thin envelope, inside a veil you mistake for a wall. The bird's line of sight cuts not just through brush, but through the premises of your life. The mystic does not beg the owl for favor. The mystic imitates the owl's gaze. There is courage in the mimicry. Night vision is not given, it is practiced. Meanwhile, the 20th and 21st centuries inked the owl into our bodies. Tattoos of masked faces, double rings for eyes, wings spread into geometry like late-bloomed snowflakes, whisper the same message as the coins. A person chooses an owl to announce that they see what others miss, or that they stood their watch through some private midnight. In another apartment, a person chooses the owl to disarm its old fear, to turn a generational omen into a personal guardian. We are still renegotiating the contract. We rewrite it with needles and ink and decide who the bird is to us now. There are gentle stories too. A child meets an owl in a rescue center, holds a glove high, feels the subtle weight of talons punctuate leather, and discovers that fear has a texture like rain on metal. The bird's head tilts, a slow calibration. The child laughs, then quiets, then studies the face until it stops being a mask and becomes a being. Maybe that's what we're all doing when we look at symbols, waiting for them to become beings. And if beings are too big a word, then at least let them become questions that walk. An owl is a question with a beak. How well are you listening? What are you hunting? For whom do you keep watch? Where do you hide when it's day? A skeptic might ask if we are just projecting. It's a fair challenge, but projection isn't a dismissive word here. It's the name of a human technology. We project onto a creature precisely so that what we cannot yet say out loud can speak back to us. The danger is not the projection. The danger is forgetting that we are doing it. When we know we're telling ourselves stories with feathers, we can ask better ones. And then the owl serves properly as a guide, not an idol. It points and we choose whether to go. The owl's modern echoes keep multiplying. On a night drive, a billboard stares with round eyes selling you the promise of vigilance. In a thriller, a turn of the head in a tree line cues your heartbeat without a single chord on the soundtrack. In a poem, the vowels themselves lengthen, a hooted vowel ending words that didn't need them. In political commentary, philosophers reach for Hegel's line to comfort themselves that they will at least understand the disaster after it has passed. In a museum, you hold an Athenian silver disc and imagine sailors staring at the same glint, praying for wind with a goddess in their purse. And in 1,000 small rooms, a person stitches an owl onto a patch or sets a tiny brass figurine on a shelf and calls it luck or protection, or maybe just something to watch them while they sleep. So what does the owl demand? Accuracy, for one. Not every ancient story is yours to borrow. Not every favorite myth survived unchanged. Some attributions are arguments disguised as facts. The relief with the owls is contested. The omen before a famous battle, embellished. The meaning of Lakshmi's mount, debated by living communities who inherit the rights. Respect is part of any symbol's maintenance. Keep the edges sharp, and the image stays honest. Blur them, and you make a costume from something that believes it's a mirror. At the end, the bird returns to its branch. It has watched us map it into coin and curse, into philosophy and dream. Possibly it does not care. It cares about the warm, frantic seam of a vole in winter grass, the wind's compliance, the arc of a fall. The owl's wisdom is, perhaps, not something we can own so much as witness. Our wisdom, if we get to say the word at all, might be the courage to sit under a cold tree and let a gaze we cannot domesticate rest on us without turning away. Perhaps that is the oldest contract, that we let the night watch us, and in return it lets us keep some of what we see. When the owl finally leaves, it leaves as it arrived, without noise, without apology, without permission requested. You might feel the air pull and mistake it for a thought. That's fine. Thought and wing are cousins anyway. The next time those eyes appear at the edge of a road or the hem of a dream, remember Athens and Rome. Remember the underworld's couriers and the goddess's mount. Remember the philosopher's dusk and the psychologist's shadow. Remember that symbols survive because they keep working. And then ask yourself, while the mask tilts toward you, what is it that you came into the dark to find?